and we are up and running. And it is a beautiful sunny day here in the Midwest. Few days after the earth-shattering results of America's electoral processes, and seems like everything is rocking and rolling around the world here. New Zealand is having huge earthquakes, so we apparently have entered into a period of shaking up things, shaking up the old, and getting people to look at what they have designated as being their source of anchorage in this world. How are you this morning, Stephen?
Kind of amused now. I'm just looking at everything that's been happening and seeing with the Trump being elected and everyone's responses. I mean, it's not shocking based on what was happening. I could sense that there was a lot of charge around this election the entire time, and that no matter which way it went, it seemed like we were all going to have our reactions to it, and that's totally okay. We're bringing it out into the light.
Yeah, well, I find it interesting the people that show up with opinions and beliefs and all of their conviction, and all of a sudden there's a sudden zig instead of a zag, and we end up having things go on a completely different and alternate direction. So that, I think, is pretty amazing and a lot of fun.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun. Hopefully we're finding a way to have fun with all of this and not taking it too seriously, finding ways to sort of divert our attention if it's getting to be too overwhelming for us.
Well, and I think the important thing is, if you're a student of the course, if you're looking at the course, you obviously don't want to go out and just throw everybody under the bus by saying, oh, this is not real, and so don't worry about it and get over it, because that's going to inflame a lot of people. But what we do want to do is stop and give a moment's pause to recognition that a lot of the very basic principles in the course are being played out for us here in a very, very literal way. So every time we think we know what something is for, it does a 180 on us and boomerangs in a whole new direction. And we end up having to sort out the mess then, because we believe absolutely, totally, and 100% that it has to be this way. And that's when fate throws us a curveball, and we have to regroup and let go of that nature of the ego to lock its jaws on something and refuse to let go. So I think overall, this really has been a good exercise in learning how not to believe everything that you are told or that you believe to be true, because you are going to have to back off on a lot of that stuff as you start to awaken to a much higher reality.
Yeah, completely well said. And I think in a lot of ways it demonstrates how the ego is sort of its own worst enemy, and it seeks to make conflict with itself in the way that you described, taking that 180 on itself and somewhat betraying itself in a way, thinking that it's betraying God or something other. And the Spirit's always there. The Holy Spirit helps us to change our perspective and to reinterpret all these crazy things the ego tries to pull over our eyes.
Yeah, it is our constant companion and our constant source of serenity in the midst of all this. And that's what I found very interesting was I kind of didn't really feel any of the madness that was going on around me. So it was kind of a surprise when I encounter it, talking to friends and things like that. It's like it comes up, and at the same time, it's very easily dismissed because you have the tools to work with. You look at it, say that's not real. I forgive everybody, and time to serve dinner.
And hopefully it's something tasty too.
Oh yes.
And speaking of food, hopefully going through these workbook lessons will be nourishing to your mind. As we go through, we're going to start at lesson 99 here. So, do you want me to start, Chris, or do you want to take it?
Why don't you run with it? This is a good one.
Okay. So 99 says, salvation is my only function here. Salvation and forgiveness are the same. They both imply that something has gone wrong, something you need to be saved from or forgiven for, something amiss that needs corrective change, something apart or different from the will of God. Thus do both terms imply something impossible, but yet which has occurred, resulting in a state of conflict between what is and what could never be. Yeah, so that's really cool. That's describing what exactly salvation is for now, right? It's saying that, this whole idea that there is something other than God's will, something other than God. It was even possible. That was when the insanity started, right? And that's what needs the forgiveness. That's what we need to from.
Exactly, and I think this one is really very timely right now because everybody especially in social media is out there having a hysterical reaction because this person shouldn't have won and that person should do this and this person should do that. And it all reduces down to that whole idea of control. And, where are you exercising control from? Do you want to hold on to the absurdities, the craziness, the nastiness that is a continuance of what was initiated over, a year ago as the elections began? Or do you want to step back from that and to honor the fact that the Holy Spirit and the presence of God are in the midst of this, and that there is going to be an outcome that ultimately will heal every situation and every individual in its own time and at its own pace. So that complete surrender, once again, comes up as a principal part of how we approach our lives on a day-to-day basis. And salvation is our only function here. That's the only way that we really serve a purpose in this world. And ultimately, the desire and the intention behind this salvation is to resolve this idea of separation wherein all of the darkness and ugliness appears to be real.
Yeah, completely well said. There are some lines here too throughout the lesson that Jesus gives to repeat throughout the day. And here's one. It says, salvation is your function with the one to whom the plan was given. Now are you entrusted with this plan along with him. He has one answer to appearances regardless of their form, their size, their depth, or any attribute they seem to have. And this is the line he gives us. He says, salvation is my only function here. God still is love, and this is not his will.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize that none of this is God's will. A lot of times you hear especially in, some of the old traditional religious environments. When a tornado hits, oh, it was God's will because of all those gay people down there, or all those, non-white people down there, or whatever. But God's only and true will is absolute serenity and love and ecstasy. So whenever we see discord or the illusion of discord, then what we are witnessing is the ego trying to reinterpret God's will for us. So we do have to be alert to that and to recognize when that is starting to unfold within our consciousness. When you go back up here a little bit, it says, how could there be a meeting place at all where earth and heaven can be reconciled within a mind where both of them exist? The mind that sees illusions thinks them real. They have existence in that they are thoughts, and yet they are not real, because the mind that thinks these thoughts is separate from God. So it takes a huge amount of effort to create this material reality, not in the sense of something that's strenuous for the body, but it puts the mind under an intense amount of pressure. And as a result of that, the mind fractures, and there's this hidden realm within the mind that we are trying to bring into the light, that we are trying to bring up and reunite with the conscious level of mind. And that really is the whole journey. That is the trick. And the salvation, the avenue that we can attain this with, involves one simple act, and that is the act of forgiveness.
Yeah, it's totally beautifully said. And and even says that here in another line, that salvation is my only function here. Salvation and forgiveness are the same. And this workbook lesson actually really brings me back to right before I found A Course in Miracles, and I said my number one intention was to find ecstasy. I was seeking out my own ecstasy, and I wanted other people to find their own ecstasy. And when I found A Course in Miracles, I realized that in order to actually reunite with this alignment of ecstasy, I would have to do some deconstruction of the ego. I'd have to train my mind back into alignment. And it's kind of like, oh, of course, that's our natural state. Ecstasy, it's not something we have to achieve. It's not something we have to work up to. It's just something we kind of actually need to, release this desire to create ourselves, release this desire to effort out in the world in order to remember.
So you're saying that perhaps it's a good idea to release that need to go out and vote, because that's supporting the ego's agenda. And oh my God, I think I just opened a can of worms here.
I know, yeah, this was actually something that came up because I did vote and I almost didn't, because all the stigma around it, and I sort of almost wanted to check out of that whole game. But something inside of me said, no for now, because we're participating in this world, even as a dream, that it felt integrity for me. It was an integrity to actually go out and vote. So I'm glad I did.
Yes, that's good. But we do have to recognize that it's not the act of voting that matters. We also have to recognize that within the act of voting, there is the exercise of judgment. And that's where it gets really sticky. As soon as you are invested in a judgment for somebody or against somebody, then all of a sudden you have been seduced. And so when we exercise that right to vote, we have to do it from that level of complete surrender to the Holy Spirit. And that is what makes all of this so uh, shadowy, I guess you could say, because we are trying to bring light into the deeper and deeper regions of darkness. And so it is like peeling off these veils of darkness. And we don't always have the assurance that everything we're doing is right. And then once again, self-forgiveness comes back into visibility here. We have to stop and step back and say, well, if I made a mistake there, I forgive myself and I forgive everybody involved in that.
Absolutely. I mean, with the case of this and being such a tender topic for so many people, I tried to tread lightly when I put it out there, but I still was glad that I participated, and I don't condemn people who don't participate in that. That's something I almost did, so of course I'm not going to judge that. I didn't have a judgment either way. I just needed to go do that for my own sake of integrity.
And that's good, yeah. It's but you don't pursue it, then it doesn't become the rabbit hole. Right. This next step here, lesson 100, actually kind of in some ways addresses this. It says, my part is essential to God's plan for salvation. Just as God's Son completes his Father, so your part in it completes your Father's plan. Salvation must reverse the mad belief in separate thoughts and separate bodies, which lead separate lives and go their separate ways. One function shared by separate minds unites them in one purpose, for each one of them is equally essential to them all. God's will for you is perfect happiness. Why should you choose to go against his will? So basically here, the fundamental thought that we're looking at is that God's will for us is to be as perfect as God is. And it is bringing the collective to a state of oneness. So that kind of goes against the idea of two-ness, of having two parties, two candidates, or multipleness. So once again, we can use this reference point of the elections to look at that and realize that this is part of a long-standing journey that will eventually resolve that need to make a decision, and we'll all recognize our unity within the divine.
Yeah, I really feel like this idea brings up the concept of preferences as well. And I mean, in this world, there are a virtually infinite amount of preferences we all have, and they're all subject to change at almost any given moment. We have preferences as to what we like to eat and what we don't like to eat, or what we like to do for money or not like to do for money. The list goes on, ad nauseum kind of. And it's sort of like, these preferences are ways that we kind of separate ourselves from each other in a sense, because it's like, I like these things, or I want these things, and you like those things. And depending on whether those things sync up enough, then we can hang out together, or we can love each other or be friends. And so this whole kind of thought system starts to break down, I feel, in context of what this paragraph was saying. And
yeah.
I'm wondering your ideas on this concept of preferences.
Well, I think that for me, it's kind of pretty much a non sequitur. I mean, unless it involves walking through flames or on a bed of glass shards, I pretty much just roll with everything that comes along. And that's always been my nature, even as a child. It was like, you know, decision making was not really my forte. When they would say, what do you want, turkey or ham? I would say, oh, I'll take a little bit of both. Because for me, it seems like the joy of the moment, the joy of existence, includes or accommodates the inclusion of all of the variety that life presents to us. So I think that, the more we are able to stay in our happiness, to stay in that place of being at peace with life, the less we are inclined to have preferences and prejudices, because you can't have one without the other. Again, duality falls into place here. If you have a preference for this, then you have a prejudice against that. So it does become interesting, because it's an ongoing challenge for us to stay in that state of just being at peace and being at rest. It says further down in this lesson, today we will attempt to understand joy is our function here. If you are sad, your part is unfulfilled, and all the world is thus deprived of joy along with you. God asks you to be happy, so the world can see how much he loves his son, and wills no sorrow, rises to abate his joy. No fear besets him to disturb his peace. You are God's messenger today. And I think that's really a big part of living A Course in Miracles, is being at peace and being able to step up a half a degree higher than the chaos that you're surrounded by in the moment, and to be able to bring peace. And the way that that happens for me is through acceptance. If we've got, ham and turkey on the plate, I'm fine. If I only get ham, that's good. If I only get turkey, that's good. So the less we are committed to, upholding the ego's need to have a good and a bad outcome, a good and a bad experience presented to us, I think the more we are evolving forward, the more we're accelerating this process of the Great Awakening, where all of these ridiculous choices are removed.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you could always go to the Course in Miracles group and start some arguments on the thread.
Yeah, we have a few people who do that too. I generally avoid those too. I think that a lot of that is really people who are not into the Course, but are wanting to create, a certain amount of stress for people who are trying to practice or evolve within the Course. So again, I don't take it very seriously.
Well, that's a good thing. Lesson 101. We are at lesson 101, which says, God's will for me is perfect happiness. I love that this is lesson 101, because like the 101 class, it's sort of like, take it back to the basics here.
That's a good point. I like that.
Yeah. Perfect happiness, the basic nature of who we are. So it says, today we will continue with the theme of happiness. This is a key idea in understanding what salvation means. You still believe it asks for suffering as penance for your sins, in quotations. This is not so, yet you must think it so while you believe that sin is real, and that God's Son can sin. If sin is real, then punishment is just, and cannot be escaped. Salvation thus cannot be purchased but through suffering. If sin is real, then happiness must be illusion, for they cannot both be true. And then it goes on and on about sin being, real, and what that would justify if that was so. But he's coming back to this idea, I feel, of saying that, the whole point here is that sin isn't real. Sin is wholly unreal. And really, that's the only way we can actually start to step into our happiness, is when we can see that.
Well, more importantly, I think, and much more to the point here, in that last sentence of the first paragraph, yet you must think it is so while you believe that sin is real and that God's Son can sin. So whenever we are confronted with that idea of forgiveness, a lot of people get bogged down in that concept. But the only way that you can experience redemption, that you can experience forgiveness, is to extend that to every individual that you meet, to every living organism that you meet. When the gorilla was ambling over toward the kid that fell into the gorilla cage a few months ago and ended up getting shot, there has to be a recognition that not just in human experience, but in all experience, in all realms of life, forgiveness is across the board the only way that we can enter into a state of self-forgiveness. If you can't do it with situations and conditions and individuals around you, then you can't do it for yourself. I mean, it's a non sequitur. So that's why forgiveness has to be an absolute total blanket. It has to be a fresh coat of paint over all of your life experience. And that's the only way you'll get out of here.
Yeah, I actually have a question here on this part, because what kind of I could clear up in my own mind is, say someone, for example, spills the milk, and you think, well, I need to forgive this person for doing this thing. But is it part of forgiveness necessarily to say this person did in fact spill the milk, or is that making the sin real?
Well, from my personal experience, that definitely adds weight to it. But when we get into those really edgy situations like that, I find that the easiest back door is happiness, is joy, is laughter. So, when somebody spills the milk, you can say, oh, let's all laugh at this, because, this isn't real. This is silly. And it's funny. It's funny that this idea could even come into our collective minds. And then we clean up the mess. But when you treat life with laughter rather than with anger and frustration and hostility and blame, then life becomes a lot more accommodating. Then we're less inclined to be on a defensive posture with every event that occurs around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying more, just the main point is having sort of a lightheartedness about it, regardless of what happened, regardless of how it happened, and how serious it might feel. If we can get ourselves to a place of joy and happiness, then we can find a way to overlook that.
That is absolutely the way it works. Mm-hmm. Every time that something happens that people around you are being reactionary about, if you can lighten it up, if you can point out the humor in it, then you're doing a very powerful form of intervention. Mm. And I think that that's what we need more and more and more. Instead of everybody being a warrior for truth and a warrior for this and a warrior for that, being able to be the clown and the jester often is what relieves the tenseness in the situation and in the moment. And that's how a solution can actually be manifest, is not by, standoffs, but by recognizing our commonality in whatever circumstance that we're engaged in.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. You want to go over some of these lines in this lesson too? It says, "Fear not the will of God, but turn to it in confidence that it will set you free from all the consequences sin has wrought in feverish imagination. Say, God's will for me is perfect happiness. There is no sin. It has no consequence."
Well, and I think, again, you have to, you can't use these affirmations as a way of glossing over. I think you have to actually confront your belief in whatever there is that appears to be erroneous, and to disassemble that, or to surrender that, to turn that over to the Holy Spirit. So it's not something where you can just, do a tra-la-la-la-la kind of thing and go dancing on the path through the flower fields. You do have to stop and work with your own mind, your own consciousness, and get to that point where you're able to share your consciousness with divine consciousness in that meditative state, in that state of atonement, because that's what really the miracle is. The miracle is the restoration of that union with God, where we remember the truth, and the truth sets us free of the experiences in life.
Yeah, and it really seems like with this lesson, in regards to how much it focuses on the unreality of sin, we get to a point where where maybe we were holding on to things from the past, but through our forgiveness work, we get better and better at not holding sin at all, even for an instant, right? Where we're not holding things against people even for an instant, right? And so we don't have to backtrack to forgive people for things we were holding a grudge against them for.
Yeah, we can drop it like a hot coal. It's the more you hold on to it, the only person who's going to get burned here is you.
Mm-hmm.
So the faster we can let go of that, the faster we can heal and give permission to the rest of the universe to heal. See, that's the beauty of it. Nothing that we're doing with the Course in Miracles is exclusively for us. Every act of forgiveness heals the collective. And every act of the extension of joy, the extension of love, is something that is shared by everyone. Now, that doesn't mean everyone may be in that exact moment aware of it, but it is purposeful in that we leave nobody out by taking this route.
Should we move on to 102?
Yes. And this says, "I share God's will for happiness for me. Not want to suffer." You may think it buys you something, and may still believe a little that it buys you what you want. Yet this belief is surely shaken now, at least enough to let you question it, and to suspect it really makes no sense. It has not gone as yet, but lacks the roots that once secured it tightly to the dark and hidden secret places within your mind. And that's exactly how it works. So as we are continuing to do our work, we recognize, or we step into that place that the sharing of being forgiven, of being sinless, is the foundation for our being able to receive that. So when it says, "I share God's will for happiness for me," if we can get to that place where we sincerely share God's will and don't arrive at a place where we are holding grudges and condemnation for those around us, then we are making the course real for us in our lives.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way the lessons are laid out too, because the last lesson was extremely similar to this next one. And saying God's will for me is perfect happiness, and now it's saying I share God's will for happiness for me. And I love how whole shift of that, the I share, the inclusion of I share God's will for happiness for me. It builds on itself in a way, and it gets the mind sort of loosened up and prepared for accepting the sharing.
Yes, or extending that happiness into, all levels of the collective.
And lesson 103 is God being love is also happiness. We just have wind in here, so don't mind the door. God being love is also happiness. Happiness is an attribute of love. It cannot be apart from it, nor can it be experienced where love is not. Love has no limits, being everywhere, and therefore joy is everywhere as well. Yet can the mind deny that this is so, believing that there are gaps in love where sin can enter, bringing pain instead of joy. Yeah, and I think it was really appropriate that the wind started blowing open for this lesson because, talking about love has no limits, being everywhere. Wherever you go to try to wall yourself off, it is always coming in and knocking on your door, and sometimes opening the door by accident. even when we try to set up limits to it.
That's very true. It has that similar nature to wind, to water, in that it is it's patient, but it is pervasive. And one of the things that I also kind of hold on to or envision when I'm working with the idea of love is that whenever you feel love, whenever you encounter a situation or a person and you feel love for that person, you are doing something that is astonishing in itself. You are manifesting God, because God is love. So when we start to look at that actual act of extending love, of being in a state of being able to give love, we are taking the truth of God and the presence and the activity of God and making it manifest in the world around us. And that is the most powerful concept, I think, that the Course can convey to us, is that presence of love, that presence of God is at all times everywhere, and it cannot be blanked out. You can close your eyes to it, but it's still there.
Yeah, and some lines he gives to us for the day of this lesson. He says in preface, this basic air we will try again to bring to truth today and teach ourselves. God being love is also happiness. To fear him is to be afraid of joy. And there's another line he gives saying, God being love is also happiness, and it is happiness I seek today. I cannot fail because I seek the truth. Was there anything you wanted to add to this lesson?
No, I think this one's pretty well solid and grounded. So the next one is, I think, a very positive lesson. So are you taking this one or am I?
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay. Lesson number 104. I seek but what belongs to me in truth. And this is a very lurid subject, I guess you could say, because a lot of us live under that misconception that happiness and joy and beauty are something that we don't deserve. So we end up having our secret sins and our hidden guilt and our shame that blocks us from claiming something that is our birthright. It says today's idea continues with the thought that joy and peace are not but idle dreams. They are your right because of what you are. They come to you from God, who cannot fail to give you what he wills. Yet must there be a place made ready to receive his gifts. They are not welcomed gladly by a mind that has instead received the gifts yet made where his belongs and substitutes for them. So our ego is always giving us the gift of guilt and shame and anger and frustration. And that's the whole point of detaching ourselves from identifying with that ego. It says today we would remove all meaningless and self-made gifts which we have placed upon the holy altar where God's gifts belong. So that sacred place that you go to, that place where there is peace and tranquility, that's the altar within you. And once you get that cleaned up, get that area cleaned up, then you are able to experience the gifts that God presents to you at all times throughout eternity.
Yeah, and there's a line here that says, I seek but what belongs to me in truth, and joy and peace are my inheritance. And I've found that throughout my journey with A Course in Miracles that there's just been a lot of space being cleared more and more for joy and peace and the love of God, really. And through that process, I found that, you know, there are different things that my own mind or my own ego has made up and put inside my own consciousness, and even things that felt on a very physical level or emotional level. And those things are all just getting sort of like recycled out and through, and sort of like this purging process. So there's a lot more room in me now than there was when I first started.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the Course, is it does open us up to experiencing our personal truth, which we are oblivious to until we actually start on this journey that the Course lays out for us. Because, you know, you'll be sitting there just kind of zoned out in your own space, doing your own thing, and something will come along that will spike a memory from 30 years ago or from 10 years ago or whatever, and you'll kind of relive that moment. And you have two options. You can either feel guilt about whatever it was that your ego is telling you did that you should be ashamed of, or you can stop in that moment and work on releasing those little thoughts that randomly come up that cause us to experience guilt and shame. And as we start to take that as part of the process of our daily lives, we start to eliminate all of those dark images from the past that we want to keep hidden. And the truth is that in reality, when we want to bring them into the light, look directly at them and realize that they never really happened.
Yeah, and it's only by actually looking at them in the light that we can recognize that.
Very true.
And the last line for this lesson says, I seek but what belongs to me in truth. God's gifts of joy and peace are all I want. So there's a really high, intense focus for that, and not letting ourselves think we want anything other than that.
That is absolutely true, yes.
And so here we are at lesson 105, the last one for today. And was it my turn?
It is.
Okay. It says, God's peace and joy are mine. God's peace and joy are yours. Today we will accept them, knowing they belong to us. And we will try to understand these gifts increase as we receive them. They are not like to the gifts of the world can give, in which the giver loses as he gives the gift. The taker is the richer by his loss. These are not gifts, but bargains made with guilt. The truly given gift entails no loss. Yeah, that's really beautiful and a really radically different perspective from the way the world thinks. I think like the idea that we need to extend and to give our gifts in order to actually appreciate them and receive them in our own mind, is what the Course is advocating here.
Well, and it also is in direct opposition to our prevailing society. You know, we've got millionaires and billionaires, and the way that they become millionaires and billionaires is by hoarding. And there are those that occasionally come along, like, what's her name, who wrote these magical stories from a few years back, who actually became a billionaire as a result of her writing, and then fell off the billionaire list because she was giving money away in all directions. And I think that really is, you know, the only way we can strike back at the ego's definition of what the world really is to extend ourselves to live a comfortable life, but to get away from the idea of hoarding and to get past that fear of living with expectations of having to make our needs met for tomorrow. You know, if we live in a state of grace, as Jesus described in the Beatitudes, then we'll give no thought to whatever may be occurring tomorrow, because all the resources we need will be at our fingertips. And we can step out of the nature of this world, where hoarding has become an art and is a source of, you know, admiration by the masses. And it goes all the way back to just the simple thing of extending grace to those around us, to not bottleneck it. But every time something comes along that doesn't fit into your structured ideas of what has to be able to stop and forgive it and let it go. That really is the core of all of the teachings that we're working with the Course in Miracles.
Yeah, I think you're referring to J.K. Rowling, the writer of Harry Potter.
Right, the Harry Potter series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I heard about that. That's really cool that she did that. And I've been finding too, in regards to physical manifestation or physical attraction to resources, including finances and money and all this, it was like you said before, it's a reflection of God's love, and the physical manifestations always seem to come through when we're receptive to God's love and opening into that. And it seems like what appears to be going on in the physical world, you know, is like a shadow of what we're opening up to in the formless world, in the spiritual world.
That's right. And you know, again, that line that Jesus gives us: "Give no thought for what ye shall eat, or what ye shall wear." You know, that really is not becoming mindlessly vulnerable to the extremes of life and living in poverty and misery. But that is living in a state of trust and knowing that trust is going to be the source. So your source of revenue is not your job or your stock portfolio or your investments or whatever. Your source is God. And when you can get that clarified in your consciousness, then no matter where you go, the resources that you need are available.
Yeah, and that's a really awesome feeling to have, because it just shows us that no matter what happens, I mean, we're always protected. We're always safe. It's like God's love just holds us like a big cushy balloon or something, as we float through the world.
That's very much the way it works. We're ascending out of this dream world and able to actually observe it manifest in all of the support systems that the divine has given us to work with.
Yeah, and some lines that are listed in this lesson too. It says, think of your quotation enemies a little while and tell each one as he occurs to you, my brother, peace and joy I offer you, that I may have God's peace and joy is mine. And so again, that idea of extension or in order to receive comes up in that line.
Right. The whole process of inclusiveness. Because, none of us get out of here unless all of us get out of here.
Absolutely. And this other line says, then bless your brother thankfully and say, my brother, peace and joy I offer you, that I may have God's peace and joy as mine. So it's the same one, but he says, determine not to interfere today with what he wills. And if a brother seems to tempt you to deny God's gift to him, see it as but another chance to let yourself receive the gifts of God as yours.
Yes. So, it reinforces over and over that same idea that everything we're doing here is for all of us, because all of us is each of us. And it's a kind of a beautiful game that we have got going here, where we can restore the depth and the beauty and the magnificence and the omnipotence of each and every one of us by accepting everybody else around us. So in this political season of condemnation and isolation and polarization and vilification, stop and think about what you're saying and doing. And before you think, oh, that person is a bastard and an idiot, you might want to calm down a little bit and think more in terms of, this is another me. And this me sees things from a different angle, but I can live with that, and I can embrace not necessarily the beliefs, but I can embrace this soul as part of my soul.
Absolutely. That sounds really great. And that's a great way to leave off for our lessons today. You can just remember that one part. Could probably help you throughout the week.
Yes, and there's no reason to have a week that isn't filled with joy. So get out there and share the love and spread the love around, and you'll have the joy of that love.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for talking, Chris. And everyone out there, feel free to like, comment, share, and feel free to leave us questions as well, and we'll get back to them.
And I'll see you in a week.
Okay, see you then, Chris.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.